Okay, I think we're gonna get started. Um, Let me know if you guys can't hear me. Just want to start with saying Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sarah Bawany. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I'm here hosting this webinar today to talk about my poetry book, which I will introduce in a minute. Awesome, thank you, Abdullah. If anyone has any questions or anything you want to ask, I'll probably be doing questions at the end, or any suggestions, please just type it in that chat box on the bottom right. First thing I will be doing is pasting ACCeducate.org, the link to the organization that is hosting this webinar. And if you don't know already, the organization is called A Continuous Charity, which I've been involved with for a few years now. It's a wonderful organization that started a couple years ago to help out Muslim college students with funding their college tuition without interest-based loans. So they provide interest-free loans. And I was a recipient of the loan in, I believe it was 2015 or 2016. And it meant the world to me, and it made my college experience so much easier once I was able to get out of the interest-free loan that I was stuck in. So this organization means a lot to me. Their applications actually open on January 15th again to apply for the next upcoming semester. And I'm pasting that link in the chat box right here for all of you to see. If you go there right now, you probably won't see anything, but once January 15th hits, that application should be open, inshallah. All right, so to transition, I was asked to do this webinar based on several things. So number one is that I'm like an ACC veteran or whatever. And I was able to use the help that ACC provided me with my interest-free loan to kickstart a lot of different things. And one was my career in social work and mental health as a clinical mental health counselor or a social worker. And start working at a nonprofit providing free mental health counseling for the Muslim community and for anybody who is in need of it. And then the second project I took on, which was more of a personal project, was to publish this book of poetry called Wholehearted. It's probably going to be backwards on the screen, but that's okay. I'm going to paste the link for the Amazon link to purchase the book below, just so you guys can kind of look at it and have the description and whatnot. And I wanted to begin first by sharing my story and sharing why I decided to write this book in the first place and what it means to me. And even my story of like why I needed an A continuous charity interest-free loan in the first place. So as I said before, I currently reside in Dallas, Texas. I went to school at UT Austin for 4 years. I graduated in May of 2017. And I consider my childhood and my adolescence to have been different from most Muslim youth that I have encountered in my life. I come from a Pakistani background, had two parents who immigrated here and, worked on the American dream and achieved a lot of it. But the things I grew up around included a lot of violence in the home, a lot of mental health issues, witnessing my family experiencing a lot of mental health issues, and then noticing how it affected myself and my two siblings. And on top of that, I also moved around a lot. And so I had this constant crisis of uprooting and rerooting and then uprooting again. And so never really being able to find a sense of belonging or home wherever I was. And it was very lonely at times. On top of that, I struggle with my own mental health issues. I had a lot of insomnia growing up. And so I spent a lot of nights just awake, sleepless. And that's a lot of where my writing and my poetry was born, was because I had so much free time on my hands. And with all the struggles that my family went through and everything that I saw, we also ended up in a place of financial hardship, which made college just really difficult for me. Alhamdulillah, I got a full ride into college in my undergrad years, but when it came to grad school and when it came down to what I really wanted to do, it just felt like there was no support, there was nothing, and not like it was on purpose with my parents, but there was just nothing out there available for me that seemed like a halal option or something that was full of barakah for me to pursue what was supposed to be a really, really good and amazing degree, which it was. So transitioning into that, the career option I chose was social work. It started off being something that I wanted to do. I started off wanting to be a doctor, as every other Pakistani American Muslim. And I quickly realized that because my childhood was so unique and what I went through was so unique, I knew that there were more people out there and that I had a unique skill set and outlook on life, that perhaps pursuing something different and something that was more the grassroots of what our community needed was much more important and more needed of me. So after a lot of exploring and digging, what I really wanted to do originally was to be a counselor, which I did end up becoming, but I chose the path of social work because it was convenient, and because it was a more holistic option to approaching the community and to approaching mental health in a more with a more macro lens, in terms of not just dealing with the mental health issues themselves, but also dealing with the community and the systems that contribute to those mental health issues. Um, and that was extremely, extremely important to me. And before I begin, before I continue, I want to kind of sprinkle a few poems throughout this webinar just to kind of give a little bit of insight of what's in this book, why the webinar revolves around this book for me, and what some of these issues meant to me in poetry form. Okay, so this is what I'm going to read, kind of relating to the financial situation I dealt with. It's called What Middle Class? It's on page 89 for anybody who happens to have the book. It is 8:08 a.m. Rent is due in 11 days. I have been at work for 8 minutes and there is already sweat on my brow. I'm calculating how many more hours I need to sit at this desk, how many more rich white folk I need to drive around the city to their tasteless and expensive bars just so I can pay my rent, which is due in 11 days. About 36 feet away from my desk, two sorority girls are banging adamantly on the closed doors of Starbucks, devoid of their morning caffeine and sugar, which is worth an entire hour of my paycheck. And while I panic about my rent being due in 11 days, I wonder how strange it is to share this world with millions of people, yet be a universe apart. And that poem is called What Middle Class? And the reason I dive so deeply into storytelling, and especially telling my story, is because I believe storytelling is really powerful. It's a powerful means of healing and catharsis. And it's also important for many people to realize that a lot of the struggles that Muslim American youth are dealing with, they're not alone in these struggles. The Muslim community often likes to portray itself as a community that has a lot of money and that has a lot of support, which to some degree that is true, but we tend to exclude single mothers. We tend to exclude the Black Muslim community entirely. We tend to exclude converts and reverts, whatever the term is. And we don't realize that many Muslim youth are really struggling, either financially or mentally. And this poem was written at the desk of one of my jobs that I worked in grad school, which was just a simple desk job. I worked 25 hours a week while being a full-time grad student. And on top of that, the part it mentions about driving people around, I was also a Lyft driver. In Austin, there's a particular company called Ride Austin. So I did Uber, Lyft, Ride Austin, all of those things. And as a Muslim woman, that's not considered entirely safe. But I did what I had to do to earn what I needed just to have a roof over my head. And so it really just, that moment felt like a big disconnect for me between myself and the rest of the world. And realizing that, like, even though I'm not alone in these struggles, I really did feel alone in that moment. And as a young Muslim person pursuing social work, especially, that in itself was difficult because I didn't know any Muslims at the time who were in mental health. It was just something I knew I needed to do and that I wanted to do. And it just felt like the right thing. I also wanted to focus a little bit on mental health because as a mental health professional, that's really important to me and I'm really passionate about that. Just to give a background on what I do, I work at the Muslim Community Center for Human Services, which is based in Richland Hills, kind of outside of Fort Worth. And it's a privilege to be able to work there because the system is set up to where we can provide free mental health counseling for the Muslim community and for anybody who walks in. We don't discriminate. It's all races, ages, ethnicities, genders, all religions, definitely. I have a huge variety of patients and clients that come see us. So we're primarily a charity medical clinic. We also just opened our dental clinic, but our social services, including education, domestic violence, mental health, psychoeducation, women's health, the women's health program as well, is entirely free. And it's a privilege to be able to work there because I know, and I've seen in my almost year and a half there, how much this service is needed and how many Muslims and people of color especially are struggling with just accessing services in their community because they're just so expensive. And many of the people who do attend our clinic are not insured and they can't afford insurance. So it's wonderful to be able to provide that for them. But what I see while I'm there is how many adolescents are struggling with their mental health. I get a lot of messages and requests to speak on this and just to reach out and help, because it's one of these weird paradoxes where everybody is dealing with it, but nobody's able to really discuss it or talk about it in a place that they feel is open and safe. And that's one of the reasons I also decided to pursue social work, is because I realized that I wanted to be the therapist that I needed growing up. Because I didn't have that. I went to a lot of different therapists growing up. None of them were Muslim up until my most recent one. But I realize now that if I had had that growing up, I think therapy would have been easier. I think my healing process could have potentially been a lot faster, and I would have felt more understood, which is the main goal for most people when they go to therapy, is to feel understood and not have to explain their culture or their religion to a therapist who doesn't understand. And that's not to say that non-Muslim or non-Desi therapists won't understand a Desi person. But just overall, when you have the same background, there's less explaining who you are or why you are a certain way, and more of an understanding of like the culture and the baggage and whatnot that comes with it. Let's see. I wanted to read another poem. This one's on page 41 of the book, and this is the poem about mental health. It's called Homefront. It's a little bit of a longer poem, but this is a really important one for me. At the heart of every conflict is injustice, and rarely in the history of the world do you not see war breaking out over it. Silence is not a vocabulary word when it comes to the battlefield. Tell me the last time everyone you know turned the other cheek when a racist tweet was posted, when your least favorite celebrity appropriated my culture, when another Black body joined the ever-growing list of deaths at the hands of the police. Our system may be broken, but our war cries are not. Yet when the battle is even closer to home, when the battleground is our own bodies, when our livers and our spleens and our hearts and our brains are cannibalizing each other, each starving for their right to live, why do we stay silent? When suicide becomes an option, when our fears are dismissed as childish, when antidepressants are forced down our throats and then down our kitchen sinks in shame, why do we not speak up? They say we have about 300 bones in our bodies at birth, but they mesh together to form 206 as we grow older. I think it's funny that our bodies put more effort into holding themselves together than our minds do. They say that when one human being suffers, the whole world is at loss. When you are struggling to maintain your sanity, make no mistake, you may be a dent in the world, but your pain is forming craters in this body we call humanity. Make no mistake, you are at war with yourself. Make no mistake, you are a raging battle. You are a war zone in disguise. Do not be afraid to weaponize yourself, to raise the white flag, to ask for help. God gifted us these bodies as an amana. Don't forget that they will speak against us one day. And this poem is important for me, especially because one thing I really seek to do is to bridge this gap between Islam, spirituality, and mental health. Because so many of the misconceptions around mental health in the Muslim community are that the two aren't synonymous with one another. And that's very much not true. It boggles my mind sometimes when I think about the fact that Allah will ask our bodies and our limbs to speak about us and against us on the day of judgment. And we talk about, that our ears and our eyes and whatnot will speak about the things that we saw or that we heard that were sinful, but we also don't factor in that they will speak about how we took care of them. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did give us our bodies as an amana. It's a trust that He has loaned to us. And we're going to be asked about how well we took care of that. That includes our physical health, but that also includes our mental health as well. Because that's very much a part of the human experience. Another thing I want to highlight is that when I speak about mental health in Islam, I think it's important to also go back to, I don't want to say our ancestors, but I guess the Prophet ﷺ, the other prophets, the narratives in the Quran. And two examples I want to give. Number one is the example of Maryam radiallahu anha. And I read an article or post or something basically talking about the verse where she's about to give birth to Isa alayhi salam. And she says, and this is in the Quran, and I'm paraphrasing it, but would that I have died before this day, when she was in so much pain. And I think people really gloss over that, but she really is referring to suicide, like actually like wishing that she was dead or that she had died. And yes, she was saying it out of pain, but she prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He provided for her sustenance and bounties and made that birth easy for her and made the rest of the experience easy for her. But the point is that she actually experienced the feeling of wanting to die. Like the most holy people that have ever walked our planet was experiencing that. And so I highlight that to say that if the leaders, the great leaders of our religion, the great leaders that we look up to from back in that time, experienced thoughts like this, and despite how strong they were and how much of a connection they had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they themselves experienced that grief and sadness. Why do we deny that we also can experience that, since we are all humans and this is all part of the human experience, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us this way? Another example I wanted to give was the Prophet ﷺ in what was called the Year of Sorrow, which is all in the Sirah. You can read about it if you're interested, which you probably have heard about. The Year of Sorrow took place either before or during when Khadija radiallahu anha passed away, when Abu Talib passed away, and when the Prophet ﷺ went to Taif and was stoned by the people of Taif. And this all took place within the year. And it's called the Year of Sorrow for a reason. The Prophet was sad. He experienced sadness and grief and loss of two of his the most beloved people in his life, and at that rejection of Taif. I don't know if I'd ever go as far to say that the Prophet ﷺ had depression, but he potentially had symptoms of it, which is understandable because he was grieving, or some sort of depressive state, like an event-induced depression. But again, it wasn't just that, oh, he prayed and it went away. Like, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was his strongest point and his stronghold, but he had the support of other people. He took good care of his emotional health, his mental health. He wasn't afraid to express when he was sad. And if we read about it, Abdullah wrote something on the chat. Oh yes, I think you're referring to the part that I was talking about. Sorry about that. And if you read about how he was dealing with it and how he was coping with it, it required him to have that physical, emotional, and mental strength. Yes, and what I was saying was that if we read about the Sirah and about the Prophet ﷺ, he cried more than any, like him, Umar radiallahu anhu, a lot of the companions were often, the hadiths often reflect on them crying, like openly crying, tears streaming down their face, wetting their beard. You read about this in the hadith and in the Sirah. And we think about like these big, strong men are crying, but yet over here, like nowadays, we tell men not to cry and to stop being a baby or to stop being a woman. When crying and emotions, again, are part of the human experience, and Allah created us with this, and it's not meant to be a weakness. In fact, if we are able to experience the full range of human emotions, instead of limiting ourselves to a very little bit, which often for men is anger and for women is sadness, stereotypically, if we're able to experience that full range instead of the little select few that society has told us it's okay, that is strength. It is strength to be able to accept what was given to us and accept what we are made of, instead of trying to limit it and pretend like it doesn't exist. And so I talk a lot about toxic masculinity and just the idea of like toxic emotions and limiting ourselves and pretending like what we feel is not there. I wanted to touch on another poem that I wrote when I was learning to undo my own personal trauma. And one thing I see and that I've experienced with people who are dealing with trauma is that they tend to have very black and white thinking, meaning that essentially things are very black or white for them. There's no balance in their thoughts. There's no gray area. There's no room for a middle ground. And as we know, Islam is the middle ground. Islam is the middle path. And so the idea of balance and leaving the black or white thinking is very much an Islamic idea. And so I wrote this, I think, when I was really young. I was like a teenager. And I was just learning that things were not as extreme or black and white that I perceived them to be. Long hot showers, unspeakable sins, the dark side, quick fiery rage towards the people I love the most, abused but also a spectator, used but also power hungry, temper 1 second, tears another, an extremist in every way possible, from one side of the pendulum to the other. Periods are straight from hell, nice boys that call me beautiful must therefore be from heaven. Middle grounds never existed in my book until I turned 19. My worldview shifted to accommodate many lenses. I learned that Islam comes in many different flavors, that not all people are simply good or bad, just lost or found. I learned that categories are tricky and putting people into boxes ends in lots of confusion and soggy cardboard. I learned that high heat on a hair straightener is never a good idea, but low heat on the stove will not cook your scrambled eggs exactly the way you like them. I learned that life is a jungle of both effortless and backbreaking paths. The oceans can be both menacing and welcoming. And most importantly, I learned that there are three sides to every story. And again, that poem is called Balance. 1 second, y'all. Oh, there's a balance part too. I'll probably read it in a little bit. But essentially, my goal for writing that poem and for even reading that poem today is just to highlight that Islam and mental health can be synonymous. There's many other examples I could give. That could be a whole other webinar, honestly. But the ideas of being compassionate to ourselves before we're compassionate, or just as compassionate as we can be to others, is also important. And recognizing that these two ideas that we've made so different from each other really aren't. And just as a fun fact, some of the first psychiatric clinics to ever exist or to ever be recorded in the world were in Muslim countries. I believe there was one in Morocco. The other one, I can't quite remember exactly where, but it was somewhere in the Middle East and Africa. And they used both Islamic methods and music therapy and art therapy and all kinds of things. And it's just really, really interesting. And it's sad to see that a legacy that we once created is something that we're so against, just simply because of our lack of knowledge of it and of our lack of being able to make things synonymous, make mental health synonymous with Islam. Transitioning a little bit, because it's the new year, I think a lot of people are really obviously prone to making New Year's resolutions and prone to making goals for themselves, which is wonderful. But I would like to encourage people watching and anyone else to also focus on what your goals are for your mental health and for your mental stability. And people often during New Year's goals will make these very, very lofty goals that are not just unattainable, but just too high reaching at the moment. Not in a bad way. Like, I think we should always aim high, but in therapy, for example, we make really big goals, but then we take small steps to work towards them. So for example, you'll see people making goals of going to the gym. And so New Year's Day and after, like, the gym is full for the first week, and then it dwindles down. The reason is, at least that as therapists, we interpret, is that when you don't start your goals off small, they don't become part of your routine. They don't become habits. They just become lofty things that we're forcing ourselves to do, and it doesn't feel enjoyable. And that's why they don't work. And so the goals I'm going to propose, little tangible steps to take in this new year to improve on mental health, are small and are more mental exercises. The first one is to check in with yourself often. Start your mornings off at just asking yourself how you're feeling. Before you go to sleep, ask yourself how you're feeling. A lot of problems with ourselves could truly be solved if we just knew what we were feeling and what we were thinking. But oftentimes we're not aware of our thoughts. We're not aware of what's going through our mind. We're not aware of who we're talking to. And that's so important, because oftentimes we can be having conversations with other people in our head and we have no idea. Or we can be feeling really depressed and upset, but we're not really thinking about it, and we don't know why we can't sleep that night until we acknowledge, like, oh, like I'm feeling this kind of way. And studies show that if you're able to acknowledge how you're feeling, it actually becomes easier to control it. And so the first step to anything really is to first acknowledge that it's there. So checking in with yourself often, in times of high stress especially. Number 2 is to question your intentions often. And some of the retreats I go to and the lectures I listen to, we talk a lot about intentions, to understand why we do the things we do. Why do we wake up in the morning and go to work? Why do we wake up and take care of our kids? Why are we waking up and cooking for ourselves? Like, what is our intention behind all of these things? Or are we just doing things very mindlessly? And having intentions behind everything, again, is a very Islamic principle. You can make something have barakah in it just by having a proper intention to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instead of it just being a mundane worldly action. And I don't remember which scholar or imam I was listening to, but he talked about how, like, for example, even tying your shoes can become an act of barakah. Like, if you make the intention that I'm tying my shoes right now, like I'm tying my shoelaces because I want to make sure I take care of my body so that I don't trip, and I'm putting on these particular shoes because I'm going to go running, because I'm going to go exercise, because taking care of my physical health is an amana that God gave me, and this is all I'm doing to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's like this mundane action suddenly became something that you're doing for the sake of Allah, and it has suddenly more meaning to it. And in this particular world, with technology and social media and everything, like our actions have just become very like clockwork. Like we don't really think about what we're doing or why we're doing it. It just becomes out of habit. And then it's no wonder that the millennial generation is burned out, is because they're doing so much in such a short period of time. And the millennial generation is really smart, and I'm a millennial, so I'm proud of that. But they're almost conditioned to just have input output with no depth or thought behind why they're doing like certain things. So not question your intentions, but like check your intentions often. Get your basic needs met. This is super, super important. Again, more of a millennial problem, I think, is because there's so much pressure that's put on us, and not even just millennials, but everybody really. There's just so much pressure put on us to be successful, to be a good parent, to be a good daughter, a good son, the best in your field, the best in your masjid. Like everything is just a competition at this point. And in doing all of these things, we often neglect just the most basic necessities that our bodies require to keep running and to be running smoothly. That includes just eating healthy, eating 3 times a day, or however much that you decide to eat, which is considered normal. Sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night. I've seen people, like every time that people come in for therapy and they're struggling with eating and they're sleeping, that's the first thing I target. And when I do, everything falls into place. I can guarantee you that. So if you realize that you're struggling and that things are not right, first check your basic needs and see if you're fulfilling your obligation to yourself just to get those met. The next one is to find balance. And as I mentioned before, Islam is a balanced religion. It's meant to be the middle ground, the middle path. And finding that balance is just so, so, so important. And when I say balance, I don't just mean balance between like deen and like dunya and akhirah, deen, dunya and akhirah, all of those things, but also a balance between the different aspects of our lives. So one thing I have an issue with when it comes to how Muslims often approach mental health is they only bring in the spiritual component of pray to Allah and it'll be okay, which yes, absolutely, that's true. But this is just one piece of the pie. There's the spiritual component, there's the emotional component, the physical component, the psychological component, the mental component. Like there's so many different things that go into this one issue that simplifying it to just a spiritual issue is you're doing an injustice to what mental health issues really are. So yes, absolutely pray and make dua and read Quran and make sure you're feeling that spiritual part of yourself, but make sure that like while you're doing that, you're not neglecting how you're feeling, or you're not neglecting your physical health, and you're not neglecting your psychology and what's really going on in your brain. So find balance, meaning use all the components to balance yourself out and take care of your mental health. Monitor thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. That stems from a particular type of therapy, which is the most common one, called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And what that idea stems from is that your thoughts and feelings together will affect your behavior. So the idea is if you're able to change your thoughts, you will change the way you feel about a particular situation, and it'll affect your actions or your behavior. And I want to give an example. Like if someone is particularly really offended by something that a friend said, it's those thoughts of like, wow, why would she say that? Why would they say something like that? Do they really hate me? Do they feel some type of way about me, etc., which leads to the feelings of inadequacy and hating yourself and not being able to forgive yourself. And then that leads to the action of like perhaps doing something really extreme, like asking them what their problem is with you. And I'm giving like probably not the best example, but it's this idea that your thoughts and feelings lead to behaviors. And so these behaviors are often unhealthy that many people exhibit. So the idea is that if you change your negative thoughts to positive thoughts, you'll also change your negative behaviors into positive ones. And that's where, again, it comes down to monitoring what's going on and what you're feeling and what you're thinking. So I'm going to take a break and read another poem. And this is more of another mental health related one. This is the second part of balance. It's called Balance Part 2. Okay. My body oscillates like a pendulum. Balance is a word foreign to its vocabulary, but it knows stress, pain, and betrayal. It is still trying to learn the word cry. When the anxiety hits, I lose full control. My eyes can twitch for 68 days straight. I can go to all the therapy in the world. I can write poems until my fingers bleed, but my hair will continue to separate itself from my scalp by the handfuls. So my body still betrays me, and I don't know how to convince it not to. I fight by seeking out long-forgotten pleasures. I watch the sunrise in the mornings, even though I know I will be left staring at the darkness above my bed at night. I work my body out until I can't feel the difference between the pain in my legs and the pain in my soul. And tomorrow I won't get up, not because I can't, but because I just can't. I have learned that there are some fights that cannot be fully won, but I have promised that I sure as hell will keep trying. And that's just a part 2 to the balance poem. Let's see. So, okay. So I said that I would probably speak for about half an hour, and that half an hour is almost up, and just leave room for questions. I wanted to read one last poem just about social workers. And if anyone has questions about what social work is or what that means, feel free to put that in the comments below. But I'm going to read a poem that I wrote about social workers. Again, this was right before I graduated that I wrote this, when I had a deep appreciation for what career I had chosen to do. Just to give a background on social workers, it's pretty much a combination of being a counselor, being a case manager, being a resource manager, really just someone that kind of fills the void and the gap in all kinds of places. When people don't know where resources are, they go to social workers. When people need help with certain policy systems, they go to social workers. Whenever people need help with counseling, they go to social workers. So social workers often have a bad rep, but the work they do is incredible, and it's very selfless, and I'm really proud to be a social worker, and to be a Muslim one at that, because there's hardly any in our community, and trust when I say that we need more of those. This poem is called, appropriately, An Ode to Social Workers. Show me your wounds. Open your heart up deep as you can go. I was always told I could be a doctor, but I am made to help you heal yourself. Give me your tears, your pain, your insecurities, and I will keep it all safe for you. File you into a cabinet at the end of the night and tuck your memories into bed and out of sight until the next week when it is time to open you up again. I will show you how to breathe by yourself, remind you that only you can complete yourself. I am not and never will be your superhero, merely a leg to your table, the fluff to your pillow, teach you how to swim so you can backstroke the way through your own tears. You are not just a checklist or a specimen under my lens, but I will serve as a means to an end, a bridge to the light, the water to your flowers. So seek my help, but you will only find you. As for me, I will be a distant memory, bags under eyes, but forever satisfied at my love for giving someone another way to view life. So yeah, that's about all I have for you guys. I'll wait a few minutes if any of you have any questions, anything you want to ask. And yeah, Jazakallah khair for listening, and I hope you guys learned something today, and I appreciate A Continuous Charity for letting me share my story, and for just giving me this platform to speak on and share my work. Thank you guys, and I'll wait for a couple minutes and see if we have any questions, and if not, then I'll end the webinar. That. And as a Muslim author and as someone who talks about a couple of controversial things in the book, I didn't want any of my work to be limited. I didn't want any of it to be changed. I didn't want issues like such as Palestine, for example, which I very, very briefly touch on in the book, or issues of like Islamophobia to be changed or curated in any type of way that limited what the message that I was actually trying to say. So the platform I went through was Amazon's, it was actually called Create Space, but they changed it to Kindle Direct Publishing. And it's incredibly easy to use. They give you an outline for what the manuscript guidelines are. You literally make the whole thing yourself in Word document. When I was compiling this book, it's actually something like some of these poems are about 10 years old. Like I wrote them since I was 15 and onwards. And you can see when you read the book, some of my voice that you read is like a 15-year-old Sarah versus a 24-year-old Sarah, which is how old I am now. And it's very, very different. But I really wanted to include the adolescents. Are there questions in the Q&A? There's a Q&A tab as well as the chat tab. Yeah, I do see questions in the Q&A. I mean, well, I only see it in the chat tab. Maybe let me check the Q&A tab. Oh, okay, I just opened it. I don't see any at the moment, but I do see it in the chat. So wherever you guys want to ask those questions, you can ask. And anyways, as I was saying, I didn't initially plan to really publish it, but I just realized that I had so many poems that it was essentially a book at this point, and I just needed to make it into the hardcover book that it is now. And I had really good experiences with self-publishing. The only downside is that you have to really do the marketing yourself, and you have to be very smart about how you do the marketing. It just takes a lot of work. When you have a publisher, the publisher will do that marketing for you, but generally they will take a bigger percentage of what you make than self-publishing will. I think with self-publishing, I maybe get 40% of what the actual book sells for, which looks low, but is actually considered fairly high. Anything else that Amazon gets back is really their binding and shipping costs and whatnot. So I highly recommend self-publishing. I think that if you're well connected and if you're smart about how you market yourself, it's definitely a great option. But of course, utilize the resources you have, because you can't do it all by yourself. Like, my husband is the one who made my cover design, and my best friend made the cover art. And without them, like, I couldn't have done that title or the cover, I mean. So I'm really blessed that I had that. And it was just such a great process. And I published this in September of 2018. And since then, I've sold about 320 books, and that's really great. Like, I didn't think I'd sell two. But it's been wonderful, and seeing people's responses has been wonderful. And I always look forward to feedback and for people to invite me to read my book and share my story and share my journey, because again, like I said, I think there's a lot of healing in storytelling and in talking about that which others are afraid to give voice to. So that's really something that's important to me. What's the Palestine poem? It's actually not a Palestine poem. I actually wanted to write a Palestine poem, but I didn't really get around to it. It's mostly a poem about, it was based on, or it was inspired or initiated after the murder of Nabra Hasnain in Virginia, I believe. And really just talks about how, it wasn't called a hate crime by authorities, and the Muslim community was infuriated because it was like, everything that we are, that we do, it just means that if we don't fit your narrative as white supremacist America, we're not really important or included. And so it just talks about how the disparity between, Palestinians and the Rohingyans and the Rwandans, like, and the Bosnians experiencing such genocide, but we're not taught that in textbooks, and we're not taught that in school. While at the same time, the Holocaust is something we read about every single year, and not to diminish the importance of the Holocaust. It was a terrible event. It deserves to be like known and spread and talked about. But it's like, why don't the Muslim issues, which were almost as bad or more or worse to some degree, many people say, why aren't those highlighted or talked about as equally as well? So just talking about, Islamophobia, and about how if it doesn't fit their narrative, it's not really considered important. And I'm gonna see if I can find the poem. I don't remember what page it's on. I should know. Oh, here we go. Yeah, or talking about how, when it comes to the idea of colorism, that white supremacists will put like Jesus like as the most important person ever, but it's like, you realize Jesus was a refugee. Do you realize Jesus was a dark-skinned Palestinian man? While nowadays, if Jesus was to come and preach his message, we would probably put him in a concentration camp. And it's just recognizing that irony. And so it's just things like that that I didn't want anyone to filter out. And I'd heard often about, I guess, authors that had gone through traditional publishers and they made them change, their message. They're mentioning of Palestine to Israel, and I just wasn't a fan of that, and I didn't even want to risk that or go through with that. So it was just important to me to make sure that my message was 100% me, and that no one was trying to filter it or curate it. I think I'm going to end now. It doesn't seem like there's any more questions, but again, Jazakallah khair for everyone who attended. Thank you again, A Continuous Charity, for giving me this platform. And again, I've pasted the link in the chat for anyone that wants to check out their website or wants to see their open application for the next semester for their interest-free student loans. All right, Jazakallah khair, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much.